it might be interesting to actually go to the source of where a lot of our foreign policy seems to be set these days, and that's at the White House. So if we were maybe to go down to the White House today, you know, and if we crept over the fence and dodged all the security guards and went up to the window and peered inside, this is what we might see. Oh, look, it's Michael Wilson, and he's there with George Bush. What I decided to do is maybe have a look at what the Canadian government is telling the Americans about our foreign policy, rather than me from my view. Let's hear it directly from our new ambassador to the United States, Michael Wilson. Now, he's a familiar face. You have to go way back into the history books. The last time you've seen him, way back to Brian Mulroney, way back in the 80s. He's a blast from the past, Michael Wilson is. He's a former finance minister for Brian Mulroney from 1984 to 1991. He was also later industry minister, international trade minister, and then with the Conservatives' defeat in the early 90s, he went on to become an investment banker at RBC Dominion Securities, where he's basically been on Bay Street ever since, until he was appointed Canada's new ambassador to the United States, replacing Frank McKenna. So what I did was look at a couple of the speeches that were just available on the website, fairly prominently posted there on the Canadian Embassy website, and I took a few ideas out of 3 speeches that he's given recently. Well, let's have a look. So I've broken it down into a couple areas. Let's start with what Michael Wilson is telling the Americans about our new relations with President Bush. He said, "No country is more important to Canada and its people than the United States of America. I'm proud to say that Prime Minister Harper immediately reached out to President Bush after being elected with a minority government and made it a well-known priority of his government to repair the Canadian-American relationship." Very frank there. In the speech from the throne, the government signaled its determination to join with our friends and allies to advance common values and interests, quote, "starting with Canada's relationship with the United States, our best friend and largest trading partner." And the emphasis was actually in the original text, and that is a direct quote from the speech from the throne that was made earlier this year. On the border and police, Michael Wilson, this is what he's telling the Americans. He said, "Canadians want improved border security and documentation requirements. We neither want to be harmed, nor do we want to be the source of any harm to our southern kin." And you remember, John Manley, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs on September 11th, he tells this very famous story about him being on the airplane coming back from a meeting in Europe on the way back to Canada, and he hears about the September 11th attacks, and the first thought that goes through his mind was, "I hope they didn't come from Canada, the attackers," because this seems to be much of the security policy and all of the new regulations that have been brought in are as much about ensuring that nothing goes across the border to attack the United States as it is about actual attacks in Canada. In fact, probably the former is the greater fear, because the latter is just so unlikely. Second, and he says, since 9/11, Canada has committed over $10 billion to enhancing border security and law enforcement. Since 9/11, the level of cooperation between our countries has increased manifold and serves as a model of bilateral cooperation. From the 30-point Smart Border Action Declaration signed in September 2001, we've moved swiftly to tighten our border on the basis of sound risk management. This was a remarkable development in late September 2001, the 30-point Smart Border Action Declaration. As it says, it was 30 points, included a whole range of new security requirements at the border and cooperation agreements and information sharing. And, it was just incredible that they were able to produce this document and get agreement within just a few weeks after September 11th and sign off on it, when nobody had really heard anything about it even beforehand. It was almost like they had it written beforehand and were just waiting to bring it out, and they found the moment to move it. The recent experience in Toronto is a reminder to both our countries. We witnessed federal, provincial, and local authorities on both sides of the border working hand in glove on a major operation of critical importance, preventing dangerous persons from threatening our way of life. As far as I know, there's still a trial to come yet, but that doesn't seem to bother Michael Wilson. On foreign policy, Prime Minister Harper has taken steps to reorient Canadian foreign policy. In the speech from the throne, the government not only committed to putting more police on the street and improving border security, but to a more robust diplomatic role for Canada, a stronger military, and a more effective use of Canadian aid dollars. Again, that's pretty much a quote from the speech from the throne. Canada is also taking decisive action on flashpoints around the world. Canada gives Afghanistan more development assistance than any other country in the world. And Canada supports the United States' effort to secure strong action by the United Nations Security Council to address Iran's clandestine nuclear program. We see what's coming. After Hamas's election and refusal to repudiate violence, Canada was the first country in the world to cut off contacts and suspend assistance to the Palestinian Authority while preserving humanitarian support for the Palestinian people. And at the United Nations, we've become steadfast in our support for Israel and in our opposition to the long-standing campaign by some of the organization's least democratic and accountable states to vilify this country. Let's have a look at what they're saying on the global war on terror. Canada is an active contributor and partner in the war on terror, particularly with our activities in Afghanistan. He went on to say, our contribution to ensuring stability in Afghanistan is steadfast. Canadians support our efforts in Afghanistan because the cause is just, because it's vital, and because it's our pledge to the Afghan people, our friends and allies. Canada does not cut and run. I'm sure that resonates in the States. That Bush was actually generated by that statement was actually generated by George Bush's speechwriters, which we have now adopted in Canada. Yet one more thing we've imported. And Canada buys almost $1 billion in military goods from American firms every year. No connection there, especially with the news today. And our significant defense trade contributes not only to economic growth and jobs on both sides of the border, but to the interoperability of our military forces in the field and to obtaining the best value for money for our taxpayers. That's why we're going out and spending billions of dollars on American-made aircraft and other equipment that's not even being put to competition. On energy, another important factor. Again, the backdrop of increasing global demand for precious energy resources in the Middle East and Latin America, Americans can take comfort in the security of our vibrant energy relationship. Canada is by far the world's largest exporter of energy to the United States. We are the largest supplier to the United States of oil, natural gas, uranium, and electricity. And most people don't know that Canada is actually the #1 supplier of oil to the United States. And finally, I found this particularly ominous, the business climate in much of Latin America has deteriorated in recent months. With the threats of resource nationalization possibly becoming a reality, Canada is not standing by. We're actively engaged in working with the United States and a variety of international partners and multilateral organizations. So these are all taken from a series of speeches, 3 speeches that have been given just within the last few months by the Finance Minister, Michael Wilson, to American audiences. So it gives us a window into what the Harper government is telling the highest levels of the Bush administration. And finally, I just want to note, if they weren't getting the point through just from Michael Wilson, the Canadian government and the embassy there took on quite an elaborate advertising campaign in the Washington, D.C. subway system. I'm not sure if anyone has seen this, taking out big banner posters, right? In fact, they were most prominently displayed on the subway stations that led to the Pentagon. And here's what it said. Okay, so here's an actual photograph of a poster that was emailed up to us and distributed around, and there's some Canadian soldiers there. CanadianAlly.com is the website. If we read the text, it says, Canadian troops in Kandahar, Afghanistan, boots on the ground, U.S.-Canada relations, security is our business. So I just leave that as a scene setter for the rest of our discussion today, and a reminder that don't always just pay attention to what Harper is telling us, because there's often two different messages that the government puts out, one for us here at home and another one to the Bush administration in the United States, and I'll let you choose which one is the most accurate most of the time. So thank you very much.